Thanks, everyone. Not often on time.
Okay, here we go. All right, is Aster on?
We're expecting a few members of the education engagement work group as well, Tanny, so we might give it a couple more minutes. Thank you. Welcome, Hugh.
Hi, everyone.
Hi, we have several board members here. Would you like to just briefly introduce yourself?
Sure. Yeah, my name is Hugh Harris. My pronouns are he, him. I am with an organization called East County Rising Community Projects based out in East County, mostly in Gresham. We do community organizing work.
All right. There we go.
Hey, Aster, we're just, we ended our other meeting a couple of minutes early, so
You are
we
up.
are ready to go whenever your team is ready.
Sounds good. Our consultant Noah Siegel will be leading the training, so let's sit tight till he joins.
I'm going to hassle him now.
Way when Noah's on.
Sounds good. Yeah, just so we all know who's here. Irene Kim with Cascadia Partners will be sitting in. I think comms training will be useful for her as well. And then we should also have our new public affairs hire, Evan Ridley, joining. So you may see his name pop up. And then did you all have a chance to meet Hugh Harris yet?
I did ask him to introduce himself, Aster, so.
Okay. And okay, there's Noah. And Wendy, do you know if Cassie will be joining us? Can you remind me?
I believe she indicated she was not available.
Okay.
Hi, everyone.
Noah, we've done introductions. I think ready for you to lead the way.
Yeah, it sounds good. Sorry, I had a little bit of technical difficulties getting online. It's great. So I'm oh, it's good. It's good. It's a bigger group, Aster, than we had talked about, right? So for those of you who don't know, I'm Noah Siegel. I'm on the consultant team for communications, and we've developed our communication strategy based on extensive polling and focus groups. And most of you have been present, I think, or some of you have been present during the presentations of that data. But some of you are also coming on board as part of the engagement and education working group, which we really appreciate. And I don't want to go deep into the polling data and the focus groups, but I did want to share a few key takeaways and why this is so important. First of all, the issue that we're working on, the flood risk to the Columbia River area and Multnomah County flood zone it's an issue that's just not well understood. Very few of the people in our focus groups had really any awareness of the levee system and the importance of maintaining it and making upgrades. So, that is a bit of a challenge when communicating and trying to lay the groundwork for a future bond measure and a new district. So that was one of our key takeaways. The second point that I would emphasize is that there's just a broad general distrust in government right now. And I think we all sort of know that intuitively. It's been a rough ride on many levels. And so the importance of trusted messengers is really greater than ever. And the people who are most trusted are people coming from community, local leaders, very local government, engineers, scientists, nonprofit representatives. So the more people we have engaged in this effort and speaking rather than staff or technocrats speaking directly to people, telling them what to do, the more it's like, this is our thing and this is what we have to do, the better it is. I would say on the positive side, from the polling, there's broad support for when it's explained to people. There's broad support for making these improvements to the Columbia River levee system and to the flood control system. And it makes sense to people. People think it makes sense to go after the federal match. It makes sense to focus on prevention instead of waiting for a disaster. They're concerned about the communities, the small businesses, and the environment. So we have pretty strong support, but somewhat weak. They just don't know that much about it. So I would say well over 60% of the people think, hey, yeah, this makes sense, we should do it. But they don't, it's not what we would call, strong yeses or deep support. When we provide messaging, that support strengthens considerably and makes the opportunity for passing a bond measure in the future much more likely. So that brings us to what we're doing here today, which is the messaging and communications around this. And when we have the right messages and we get them out there, the more compelling it is. One more person coming in. The more likely it is that that we'll be able to get this effort done. So what we've done is put together quite a few resources to help us get the word out about what we're doing here and why it's so important. We wanted today to walk you through those resources, to show you where they, to tell you where they live and what the thinking is behind those, and then to give you some opportunities. Aster is going to walk through our PowerPoint with you. We would hope that you would take the PowerPoint and make some presentations on your own. These resources are for your use, and then give you some time at the end to ask us questions about it. So that's basically our goal today. Aster, did you just activate something?
I don't think so.
Oh, okay. It just left the screen for me. I'm sorry. 1 second. Any questions on, there we are. Any questions on what we've been talking about so far? We're kind of hurrying through. Yeah, go ahead.
One thing I would add to the board is that if you find a presentation that you'd like to give and you want staff backup, or you would prefer staff to make that presentation, just let us know and we'll be there, or we'll let you know we can't be there, but you're not alone, and we're happy to help you.
Yeah, there were a couple of, thank you, Jim, that actually transitions nicely into, I just wanted to share a few key points like that about what to think about and how to approach this before we dive into the materials themselves. So, Aster, I'm going to actually just share the agenda document for a second. There we go. So the first thing I just wanted to emphasize is that we have a brand for this effort. For those of you who are not familiar with it, we've named it the Flood Safe Columbia River Initiative. This covers the overall work of having a new and improved and upgraded flood safety system. And it lives at the website, floodsafecolumbia.org. A lot of these resources will be there as well. One of the reasons we thought it was important to brand the effort was because we have so many districts and acronyms, and it just gets more and more complicated the more you try and explain what's happening with the different overlapping authorities. And it's simpler just to say what it is we're trying to do, which is to make the area around the Columbia River flood safe. And so a lot of this stuff that we're talking about lives on the website and is available as a resource as well. For those of you who are just plugging in as well, I think it's important just to get a sense of the timeline. So we're currently in the bond development phase and taking input through engagement, which is why what Jim said and what Aster is saying is so important. This is a chance for us to get out there and share details about the bond, and you'll see in the deck that it has really critical information about that. Not only that we want to pass it, but what are the options for developing it, and what do we need to hear from community? We'll be moving towards the end of the summer and into the fall into a set of recommendations and reports to the Urban Flood Safety Water Quality District, and including full polling on what measure seems likely to pass and what our options are for including in that bond measure. I mentioned a lot about the messaging already, and Jim mentioned the importance of bringing in the staff to support as well. I wanted to just say what are our asks of the community as we're going out to make these presentations? Number one is we want their participation. So we have an active survey with a link on the website. So in addition to live events, the more people we get to fill out that survey, the more informed the board will be as they move towards making a referral decision. We want to distribute our core materials as much as possible. We're gathering a story bank. So, because this issue is somewhat obscure for a lot of people, the more direct stories that we have about life in the floods area, history in the flood area. So just to give a couple of shout outs, we have some wonderful videos already from Bob Salinger and Ed Washington that about the history of Vanport and about the ecological value of the area. And we would love to accumulate as many of these stories as possible to help people make the connection to all of the important things in this flood zone, whether they work and live there or not, how important it is to the whole region. And finally, this is not an active campaign. This is run by the public sector, and there will be a campaign period at the end. But we are looking to make the case that this is broadly supported. So what we are trying to gather are testimonials that we would put on the website that would cover the full range of folks who would benefit from this work, whether that be small business or tribes, residential communities, what have you. So we would like to capture as many of those stories as we can. So if you have them, or if you're encountering them while you're out there, if you could please help us collect them up and capture them either in video or in written testimony, so that we can really show that this affects the lives of real folks and will make a big difference in our region. So with that, I'll pause one more time for questions, and then I'm going to dive into materials just so you can get a sense of what we have and for your use. Any questions?
I have my hand
Mary
up.
Helen, yeah.
Yeah. This is the first I've heard about the story bank, and I am encouraged that there is going to be one, but how are you going to present that? Is it just going to be on the website? Because the project that I'm involved with, Vanport Place Marking, we're putting audio boxes with stories. Ed Washington was a big part of that. We have numerous people that were Vanport residents, because we're working on a historic site proposal for the National Register. And are you going to duplicate those? Where are you going to get these stories? I know that the Vanport Mosaic has historical interviews. The Oregon Historical Society does, Portland Archives. And so are you going to just reproduce all of that and call it part of flood safety? Or are you going to refer people to what already exists, which is pretty substantial at this point? But there's, as everybody knows, Vanport survivors are dying off. And so there's family history, there's photo. I mean, I guess I just want to see the intent of the more the merrier, or is it going to be something that will be held in for future when flood safety Columbia becomes a reality, or the geo bond, or who's going to fund all the collection, the interviewing, etc. We have Native American woman that's doing Native American interviews. That's board of directors. And Ed Washington's on our board. So I guess I just want
Yeah, I thank you, and thank you for allowing me to clarify. I think that it's important, Mary Helen, thank you. There's a distinction here, which is we're not trying to do a big a formal repository of testimonials or any kind of website or anything like that. What we need are, this is really much more actionable. We're looking for, 3 to 4, compelling stories, some historical, some current business, residential, people who are willing to talk currently about why this is important. And this is more for things like pitching the media on why this is important, as opposed to creating an ongoing resource. It's really just about telling the current story and making it compelling. So we can use all the things that you're describing, not duplicate it. And we want to actually be pretty nimble. So it's really about collecting up the most compelling stories we can. That's what I mean by story bank.
Okay, and I think that there couldn't be a better candidate for that than Ed Washington. I know Ed's in the meeting, so Ed, I've just volunteered you to do your magic and your speech, and because it is compelling, and he was there. So, and I should I send you the other ones that I think would be compelling? Okay.
Absolutely, that would be wonderful. That'd be wonderful. And even just your friends and family, and people around you who might have not just about historical flooding, but what's at risk for them currently. So whatever comes to mind, please do send that to us.
Okay.
Okay, I'm gonna push through because I really want to have time for Aster to present the deck. So let me just mention, without showing each and every one of these materials, I want to just make you aware of what's available. So we will have on the website available to everyone. You can pull it down, print it out, or use the links to distribute. We have a one-pager on flood safe Columbia River in general, what it is, why it's important, and what it involves. We will have a specific one-pager on the bond measure itself and what it will build and how much it could cost. And then we also have a public-facing FAQ, frequently asked questions, with general questions like, what is a levee? How are the projects selected? How long will it take to get built? So those will be available on the website. And then for those of you who are going out, we'll have additional resources on the SharePoint, on the MCDD SharePoint. This includes key messages and talking points for you to take with you if you're speaking or if people are asking you questions, and a long and a short version of this presentation deck with a full script in the notes section, so you don't have to come up with all of the narration for presenting it. It's all right there for you, although I'm sure everybody would do it in their own style. And then a much deeper document written by Carrie Sentiment and Aster about what is in the bond development proposal, specifics of the projects, cost estimates, etc. So that will all be available on the MCDD SharePoint, not to the general public, although it's available for public records, but it's for your use and not for the website. So I can go into some of those later, but I think I really want to make sure we have enough time right now to get a sense of the presentation itself, because that's kind of the center point of this whole thing. So I'm going to kick it back to you, Aster, to walk it through.
Sounds good. Yeah, so this is the shorter, 10 minutes or less version of the presentation. When you look into the long version, we actually have some embedded videos that you can click. We took some videos of Bob and of Ed Washington. So those are embedded and fun features. I think, Wendy, you were going to share the presentation for me. Thank you. All right, so yeah, I will get rolling. Like Noah said, this is my take on the presentation. I've given it quite a few times now. I imagine everyone will have their own style, and it's roughly based on the script that Noah provided you with. So, hello, my name is Aster Moulton. I'm the Public Affairs and Community Relations Specialist with Flood Safe Columbia River. It's an initiative to raise awareness about the flood safety system along the Columbia River and the fact that the system is in need of some major upgrades. It represents the agencies that currently manage the flood safety system along the Columbia River, as well as a new agency that we are standing up that will integrate equity, cultural history, nature-based solutions into how we manage flooding, and will ultimately have a sustainable revenue source for managing this system. This initiative also includes partners, local agencies, community-based organizations, and businesses that are all committed to supporting the resiliency of this flood protection system. Next slide. So this flood protection system exists along northern Multnomah County. It protects the Portland area from major Columbia River floods. Columbia River is a massive waterway that we know runs between Portland and Vancouver. It's 12,000 miles long, starts in British Columbia, and has a drainage basin roughly the size of France. It also has the second highest water volume in the country, second to the Mississippi. So it's a truly massive natural force that our levee system has to protect against. Next slide. So we are seeing extreme weather events all across the country due to climate change. We've seen increasing heat waves. We're experiencing some of that right now, and wildfire smoke in our own region. Climate change is also causing extreme weather events in the form of heavy rain and rapid snowmelt, which could lead to an increased risk of flooding. We're seeing this across the country and the world. Fortunately, we haven't seen too much of that in our region yet, but it is certainly a risk that we could face and something that we need to be prepared for. Next slide. So yeah, like I just mentioned, major floods are increasing with climate change, and the Portland region is at risk. The levee system protects an area approximately the size of Beaverton from massive floods, and within that area are natural resources that need to be protected from floodwaters, as well as vulnerable communities. Next slide. So the flood protection system is hidden in plain sight. It's made up mostly of levees and pump stations, and a conveyance system made of sloughs, ditches, pipes, and culverts. A lot of the system, you may not know it's a flood protection system if you don't know what you're looking for. Marine Drive, for instance, sits on top of one of our most important levees, and a lot of people bike or drive on Marine Drive, not knowing that that the system it's standing on is more than just a grassy hill. So yeah, it makes sense that a lot of people are not aware of this system because it doesn't look like typical infrastructure that people expect to see. Next slide. A little bit more about how our levees and pump stations work together to keep the area safe from flooding. If you can imagine Columbia River on the right, we're looking east towards Mount Hood. Marine Drive is in the middle, sitting on top of that levee. So when it rains, and a combination of rain and snowmelt can cause the Columbia River water levels to rise, and our levee protects the area from that high water. However, that levee also creates a disconnect between the watershed and the Columbia River. So when it rains in areas of northeast Portland, Gresham, Fairview, Wood Village, Troutdale, that water would, if there wasn't a levee system, that water would flow to the Columbia River. But there is a levee system, so it blocks that natural flow. That's where our pump stations come in. Our pump stations are really critical in pumping that water over and under the levees so that it can flow to the Columbia River and down to the ocean. Without our pump stations, this area behind the levee system would flood in the cases of major rain events. And there are some pumps that are working all the time because we're constantly getting water in the Columbia Slough from groundwater as well as heavy rain. Next slide. So yeah, here's an aerial view of our levee system. It's a 27-mile system, 17 miles of levees directly on the Columbia River. And this area, before the levee system was built over 100 years ago, was a natural floodplain. The indigenous community used this area for trade, travel, wapato harvesting, and it flooded seasonally. That's essentially why there's still a flood risk today. Next slide. In the system, over time, the levee system allowed the area to develop. Today, there are nearly 8,000 residents, some of which are more vulnerable to a flood risk. Some of them don't speak English or have limited access to cars or technology. There's also a massive amount of economic activity that's generated by the area. 16 billion in annual economic activity. 60,000 people rely on this area for their jobs. There's also Oregon's second largest source of drinking water is protected by the area. In the case of a major flood, there would be operational concerns related to that drinking water. There's PDX International Airport, and then a lot of natural spaces that people in the region rely on for recreational opportunities. Next slide. And just quick pause, Noah, if at any point you want me to speed up a little bit, I can do that. Yeah, so in this, the flooding has happened in this area before. There's a significant flooding history in Portland. There's been 6 major floods over the past 120 years. The most significant or most memorable is that a lot of people know about the Columbia River flood of 1948 that destroyed the city of Vanport, displacing 18,000 people in less than 30 minutes and killing at least 15 people. And our levee system today has a lot of the same vulnerabilities that it had almost exactly 75 years ago when this flood happened. There's been, no major improvements since then. And now there's even potentially more risk because of the threats of climate change. So it's happened here before. Next slide. And it will likely happen again. Here are some examples of recent flood events that happened up and down the West Coast. In 2021, a pump failed in British Columbia. You can see the impacts of a pump station failure. 2020 in Pendleton, Oregon, there was a levee breach. And this past year in Monterey, California, heavy rains caused a levee breach, which displaced vulnerable populations. And in Monterey, similar to our system, there was drinking water that was affected. Next slide. Our flood control infrastructure no longer meets federal standards. In the aftermath of Hurricane Katrina in 2025, federal standards for levees increased significantly. And we did assessments on our system and realized that we no longer meet those standards. So we want to, obviously we want to meet those standards because we want communities to be as protected as possible, but also we need to meet those standards to make sure that we can maintain accreditation on our levee system. Without accreditation, flood insurance will be incredibly costly to people living within the levee protected area and could displace small business owners and some low-income homeowners. Next slide. Mentioned this before, the system is over 100 years old and requires urgent upgrades. Resilience to flood events is low. We have minimal backup pumping capacity and power supply. So when our pumps need to be working the hardest during heavy rain events, that is also when power failure is most likely. And right now, only one of our pumps has backup power. And a lot of our pumps are old and need to be replaced. This past winter, this holiday season, we had a pretty heavy rain event in the region, and our pumps did keep up with the water capacity, but just barely. If there had been a power failure, if it had rained just 1 more inch in that span of 2 or 3 days, we could have seen some flooding in the area. Next slide. So fortunately, there are solutions. They are cost effective, fairly simple. First is to expand the levees and flood walls in the most vulnerable areas. Second is to upgrade those pumps and other aging infrastructure. And then third is we can increase resilience with natural flood protection. And I'll go into each of these in the following slides. Next slide. So we want to upgrade our levees and flood walls in the most vulnerable area. I mentioned earlier that our flood safety system today has a lot of the same vulnerabilities that it had in 1948 during that Columbia River flood. That railroad embankment was never designed to levee standards, and it still isn't designed to those levee standards. So in order to create more resiliency in that part of the system, we're going to build a new levee along that railroad embankment that failed and destroyed the city of Vanport. We also need to upgrade our levees to meet modern standards of flood protection. That looks like raising our levees in the height of our levees at lower points. And we can also rehabilitate and replace our drainage infrastructure to reduce pressure on the levees during high water events. Next slide. So I already talked about our pump stations a little bit. This is a picture of our SDIC pump station, or our pump station. I probably, just quick pause, I probably wouldn't say SDIC, I'd say pump station in eastern part of our system during the 1996 flood. And as you can see, it's not keeping up with the high water levels. And this is a pump station that we need to replace in order to maintain that federal accreditation. So we'll need to replace pump stations that are old and underperforming. We'll add backup power generation to reduce flood risk, and we'll make sure that our facilities are safe and functional so that we can respond to flood emergencies in an efficient way. Next slide. And finally, we want to increase resilience with natural flood protection solutions. So natural areas like open spaces, wetlands, floodplains can slow and store flood waters when they happen. And ultimately that reduces pressure on our flood protection system, slows water flow to those pump stations, gives them a little bit more leeway in pumping that water out. And when they, when there's not a flood event, when they're not working hard storing that water, they also provide excellent habitat for fish and wildlife and provide water quality benefits as well. Next slide. So key steps, we are currently standing up the agency that will manage all of these new projects and programs related to flood safety. In order to fund some of the hard projects, the capital projects, we'll issue a modest bond measure, refer that bond measure to urban Multnomah County voters to upgrade our infrastructure and make these important improvements. And that flood control district will ultimately oversee operations and improvements with a modest operating revenue. And yeah, we'll need to fund those operations and maintenance through a small tax or fee. Next slide. There's an amazing window of opportunity if we're able to get local match. The federal government will invest $100 million into the region to make sure that these projects happen, and that 100 million represents 2/3 of the cost of some of our most important projects. So It's really, really significant investment that we need to act fast in order to make sure that we can take advantage of this investment within the small time frame that we have. Next slide. So we are currently gathering feedback on 3 different bond scenarios that range from 170 million to 250 million. The cost for the average household ranges from $29 a year to $41 a year. And yeah, we're currently collecting feedback on community priorities when it comes to flood safety and different flood investment options through a short survey. And then I think this is our last slide. A quick pause is that sometimes I'll also include a QR code to the survey on this slide so that people can take it as they're listening to the presentation.
Thank you so much, Aster. And so just a couple of notes about the presentation. One is that obviously, like if I were giving it, I don't have the same expertise that Aster does, which is, very deep. So the point that I made earlier is, and Aster, if you could maybe show in the notes, just give a taste of what it, anyway. The full script is in the notes with a lot of, almost all the details that Aster was offering. So don't feel like you need to have that knowledge. The second thing is we're really hoping that this, that the narrative feels comfortable for everybody. It's for your use, and also can be, as I said earlier, adapted to specific audiences. There we go, you can see that. So the longer deck, for instance, has video about, with Ed talking about the history of Vanport, or Bob talking about natural areas and goes deeper on those issues. So we can help you create the right slide deck for the right audience as well. And the third and final thing I wanted to say is, because of what I said right off the bat, that knowledge about this is pretty shallow. I realize that this is an incredibly complex issue on some levels. We have, the formation of the district, and we're still talking about the operating cost mechanisms, and there's no shortage of detail to get into. But for the general public, this question of should we or should we not make these capital improvements to keep the area safe, to meet federal standards, and to get this done in a timely manner, we really need to get that message out there. So it's important that we all that we tell a consistent story. That's why we wanted to provide a deck that everybody can use and not create confusing multiple versions of this as we're explaining what this is and why it will likely come to the ballot in May. So it's really important to us that it worked for you, and would be happy to just get your feedback on it right now. I have a couple more things to say, but it's a good time to pause and ask questions, just because Aster did such a great job presenting.
Okay. Board.
Tanny did the.
Yeah, here we go. Eric Molander.
Yeah, so just a second, let me, so Aster, let me ask you, what kinds of questions are you getting from this? What kinds of reactions have you had? I look at this and realize that a lot of it is just educating people about we're here, and not so much about what's in it for me.
Yeah, I think general impressions have been pretty supportive, and a lot of people are unaware of the flood safety system. So I think people appreciate the awareness building types of questions that I got. People do ask about how the flood safety system is funded today and why that doesn't work, and why we need to kind of rethink how this is funded. I think other questions are, I've gotten asked before, how old are our pump stations? When do they need to be replaced? People are sometimes a little surprised that the cost for the average household is so low. So I've gotten questions about that before. And I've gotten questions about the federal match, you know, if that is something that will be available down the road, or if that's something we need to take advantage of now.
Esther, I just wanted to add one detail, which is that we have done a tailored version of this deck for people who are directly impacted or benefiting from the levy system, and they tend to be more knowledgeable. It's important, what we're focusing on here for the most part, the vast majority of voters who are going to be weighing in on this have no idea whatsoever that this exists, that they don't get a direct benefit from it if they're not living there. So that's why the polling and the focus groups have been so important. We've been trying to figure out how do they connect to the risk and the value of this region. So here is I'm just pulling this up for a second. These are the talking points that are available to you as well on the MCDD SharePoint. And really, these are drawn from all of the research we've done to say, you know, what's the quickest way to connect people to why this is important. So climate change really resonates right now as a threat, but flooding awareness is low. People are aware of fires and extreme heat. So making that pivot quickly from there's climate disaster everywhere. You just saw it in New England, happened in California. It can happen here. It's old, doesn't meet federal standards. You can see the elevator pitch here. We have an opportunity to get $100 million for preventive work and protecting. And these are the key things that resonate with people: lives, homes, jobs, and environmental quality. So if you're boiling it down to just one thing to get as many people as possible to understand the value and the critical importance of this is that paragraph. And then the rest of these bullets are available to you to support those points. So I just wanted to show that as well.
Thank you.
Thank you, Noah. Mary Helen?
Astor attended the Rose Cup races at PIR this past weekend. And it's a large demographic that doesn't normally get reached about anything historical, etc. And I know that she had conversations with people, and I've heard back from some people. And one of the questions that I get asked is exactly, I think you kind of touched on it, about what it's going to cost me. And you said minimal, but we don't know what it's going to cost them. It could cost $20. It could cost more. If we don't get the geo bond, you know, what's going to happen? Is the city going to end? And so it wasn't really clear. And so the few people that I talked to afterwards said they didn't understand why the city wasn't paying for it because they owned the levy. And we know that's not totally true, but they own them. And why has the levy deteriorated if they've done maintenance for 100 years? And so those are the kinds of tough questions, I think, that are faced in your presentation. It made it sound like it was all good and wonderful and everybody liked it, but there sort of is a background of people that didn't want to come out and say, you know, this is crazy, we're paying for something that somebody else should, and nobody can tell me what I'm going to pay. And I'm going to go back to keep saying it over and over. $20 a year is maybe minimal to some people, but is a lot of money to other people. And we don't have to my knowledge yet, a formula in place for limited income people to not be affected, because renters are going to vote, but they don't have any control over the rent going up because the owner's not going to foot the bill for them to stay for this levy project. And so I kind of feel like it would be difficult to stand up and say, yeah, it's only going to cost you $20 a month and you're going to be safe forever, and not safe forever, but it will pay for things that the government has said are needed. And it just seems really complicated to people that, like Noah said, what I think you said, 60% of the people that don't even know there's a levy. So for them to digest this all in a public meeting, a neighborhood meeting, a half hour, I think is, I don't know if there's another answer, and I'm not an expert at community engagement, but I think it's difficult to be able to present this in PowerPoint slides to people that don't even know what you were talking about or don't even know anything about what they're now listening to. So maybe Noah, you could give us some pointers in, how do we on the spot make this very well-prepared slide deck make sense to people that had no clue what it was going to tell them, and then be able to, is there follow-up? Is there, we have a hard time finding, people to come to landowners meetings, so that doesn't seem to be an option until we change that system. There are large landowners in Penn 2 that have no clue what it's going to cost them because nobody's reached out to them. And I'm just concerned that we're going to be taking a message out there that's going to confuse people even more or make them angry that now their property tax bill is going to show a lot more money or minimal amount of money, depending on how you define it.
Well, my hope is that the deck does boil it down, into the broad, into a most accessible narrative of what this is and why it's important. If there are ways to fill in gaps or make that better, we can always improve it, and would love to get feedback as it's used going out there. So I did hear one thing, for instance, that you said, Mary Helen, that might be helpful to include, which is, a note about who owns it, and to just clarify that, so that people that might have misconceptions about who owns it and why, and so that kind of thing could be very helpful. The bottom line is that if we are going to take advantage of the 100 million and refer that out to voters, we have to tell them at some point that they're going to pay property taxes for it. So our goal is to make that as clear and understandable as we possibly can. I do want to emphasize that the initial effort to tell the story and make people aware that this is happening is not the same as answering every detailed critique and question. And I want to be really clear about that. So we have included what we think, the language and the details in here includes, is derived from what is most compelling in public opinion research, but is vetted in great detail by the MCDD team, the engineers, et cetera. So it's, that's all approved language, but that doesn't mean it'll cover every single question that you have, that you may receive. So a couple of things around that. And we're not expecting people to go out and be, White House spokesperson for this measure. What we want is to have as many points of engagement as possible to open up those conversations. So a couple of things to say about that. One is, as Jim said at the beginning, you can bring staff along with you for additional expertise, and just let us know and we can do that. The other thing is that it's perfectly okay to say, I don't know, and I'll get back to you, rather than try. I often struggle with this when people ask me hard questions. I want to answer it right away so that they feel satisfied. But sometimes the best thing to say is, that I don't know the answer to that. Let me follow up. And, the add-on point to that is, please do follow up. So we'll take those questions. We are refining our FAQ constantly. And we'll reach back out to everybody who has follow-on questions as a result of engagement.
Can I just suggest one thing? I forgot I wanted to say this actually first. With to schedule like once a month or once every 2 weeks, or a month might be too long, but a Zoom information session, and then advertise that to people so that you don't wait for them to come to you. It's like the city's doing with the transition team. You can come to a session here, or you can come to a session there, but I would suggest Zoom calls because most everybody can do that, and then they can listen in. So if you find people that are not going to travel but might be interested, you could do Astor could do the presentation, and then you would have the community outreach that you would need. The city's transition team I think the Columbia River Treaty did the same thing, listening sessions, question sessions, so that people can get more information. And if they don't get it the first time, they can go the second time. I don't know the cost involved. I don't know any of that, but I would suggest that with the city and my time spending on the Columbia River Treaty sessions has been very helpful to help me understand what it is they're doing and what people are have questions about. So.
Yeah, Mary Helen, I'm open to trying that. We did have a webinar in April that had pretty low attendance, I suspect, because it's the summer and a lot of people want to be outside. And so we have tried to meet people where they're at community events, at neighbor events. We're gonna do some door knocking in the managed floodplain to hopefully meet people, at their house when they're most likely to be at their house in the early evenings or the weekends. We're gonna send another mailing out. But I do like the idea of virtual events for those who can't, who have kids to take care of and don't have the opportunity to attend these meetings. I do worry about attendance during the summer, so I wonder if that's something we want to do in the fall.
I think Eric could, Molander could speak to this better than I, but the session that I heard about that Colin did at the Portland Yacht Club was well attended and a lot of good information and a lot of really good comments. I mean,
that was in person though, right? The Portland Yacht Club event? Yeah, that was that was an in-person event. Yeah.
Yeah, well, but that could have also been connected to a Zoom meeting so that more people could attend. And so I think that's those are the kinds of things that when you say managed floodplain, Air National Guard, you had 2,000 people that are there. They might want to know a story. They all vote. They have family. I mean, those are the kinds of, I think we should pay attention to the large landowners as well to set those sessions up for them.
I just do, I mean, I think we're going to try to, those are all good suggestions and we want to get staff out there as much as possible. I do want to just emphasize the point I made about our polling early on. And one of the reasons we really wanted to engage with you is this is so much more compelling to people when it comes from their own community. And so we, as much as possible, if you are willing or if other stakeholders are willing to take this message out, and Mary Helen, to your earlier point, we have leave behinds with bond information. It's not all the deck and the presentation. We have the one pagers and additional things. So we will do whatever we can to support engagement, but it is just so much more compelling if it comes from within community. So I just wanted to emphasize that point.
Thank you, Noah. Eric Molander.
So one of the things that does poll very well is this notion that we have upgrades to the levee system. Are we prepared to tell people how much better it is? So currently it's once we're protected against once in a 100-year flood. Are we willing to say that it's now once in a 500-year flood? Or we're protected up to 7 inches of rain within a 24-hour period?
Eric, I've talked to Bill extensively about that, and we should probably have a work session where he can talk about the complexities of that. I think there are some things we can say coming out of the assessment with the Corps and so on, but it just, particularly with the internal rain events, it's so scattered and episodic and limited in geography. We can say, and Colin, maybe you can weigh in based on the Corps' evaluation, what we're getting from the levee work on the Columbia River side. And then the last thing I would point out is that there's a national debate going on about rainfall and what is a 100-year event and what isn't anymore. And that's changing, and FEMA and the Corps and the Weather Service and others are working on updating that information based on the new normal. So those are the complexities that are involved. And I hear your need, and I've been pushing Bill hard to come up with a way of articulating it a little bit more clearly, and we are challenged in doing that. So. Right. Colin, do you want to add anything based on what the Corps assessment told us? I do think the Corps is prepared in the assessment to say that there's a change in protection.
And we've incorporated that into some of the FAQ answers, but I think the real challenge is that the pumping capacity, and so much of it is based on sub-basins within our system and type of rain. But yes, we do not even meet that 1% annual chance or 100-year storm. And technically, I guess we get up to a 470-year storm, but that it's not quite as compelling that way, but it's almost to a 500-year level. So we've incorporated some of those notes and still working on getting that internal, those talking points.
Thank you, Colin, because this is, among the skeptics, this is one of the things that they would find very compelling. And I appreciate you working so hard on what is a really difficult engineering challenge, but boiling it down so that somebody that's skeptical can finally say, okay, now I get it, is going to be important for us. So thank you very much.
Eric, I just wanted to, quick thing just to say that I went 3 rounds with Bill on this question. I think you're absolutely right. It's really important. People need to understand the benefits. And I do want to say in the longer slide deck, and you can take a look at it, we'll send out that link. There are 3 slides that break out the differences between the 3 investment levels. And when you see that, there's specific details about what the incremental benefits are. So take a look at that and see, we need to keep talking about this, but I hope that gets us a little closer to the answer.
Got it.
And I want
Thank
to
you
offer
so much.
mad respect to Bill, because we're making him really uncomfortable by pushing him to articulate this more. So mad respect to Bill, and he's trying to protect us by not committing to something he can't commit to. So really respect him and appreciate him, and wanted to make sure you knew that.
Absolutely. Gotta love engineers.
Thank you. Corky Collier.
Well, one way to approach it does strike me, if we can't articulate it, then how can we expect the public to understand it? I think we're all in agreement that we need to do a better job of making a simple statement about how much more protection we're getting. And maybe it would be a good idea to just lean on the Army Corps projections as opposed to ours. Instead of us uncomfortably committing to a certain level of protection, we say, well, the Army Corps increased their standards X%, and just make it very simple. I would also, as I think everybody here is aware, avoid 100-year, 500-year, descriptions, because as we know, those are dated and hard for people to understand. And if I say, oh, great, now we have 500-year protection, a lot of people may say, well, what do I need that for? I'm not here for 500 years. So yeah, let's avoid that. And let's talk about, my suggestion is talk about the percentage increase in protection. Are we getting 5 times more protection than what we thought we had before? That sort of thing.
One of my favorite questions at a neighborhood meeting was, well, we had a big flood in 1996, so it's not going to happen again until 2096. It's like, well, it doesn't quite work that way, but
yeah.
And just a comment, I don't do a lot with polling, so I'm not very familiar with it, but do we often go out and say, okay, you could choose this, this, or this? It kind of seems like we got the value meal and the supersize going. And I'm just wondering if it would be better to say, listen, we need 150 million. We're going to get 100 million from the feds, shut up and vote type of thing. I mean, a little more pointed than, well, we could do this, we could do this, we could do this. It almost seems like we're, well, I don't know. It doesn't seem as desperate to me.
I think what we're trying to do is gauge what's the top end, because our need is greater than the low end for our system.
Okay.
And so we're trying to get at the concept of willingness to pay. And so would you be willing to pay for this? Yes. Okay, how about this? And do you want the clear undercoating? Great. And so again, we have a series of techniques that these professional pollsters use to tease out where that threshold is, where they're, yeah, no, not willing to go there. One of the key benefits we have here is explaining to people that this is not complicated technology. because people go to the Columbia River crossing and things like that. Oh, this is going to collapse under its own weight. Actually, no, we need backup power, bigger pumps, and we need to raise the levee by this much. Oh, okay. We're probably not going to screw that up too bad.
All right.
I really like what you just said, because that would get a lot of votes. Because this is kind of a comical reaction, but a guy in my neighborhood once, when we were talking about clearing out the side levee behind the golf course and what it was going to cost to do it, and he said, "You mean you're willing to spend money on a Western painted turtle and not me?" And so the people will put it down to that amount, and so I think that idea of Corky and Tanny's and what Jim just said, just make it short and sweet. You're going to get this, and this is what's going to happen if you don't do it.
Yeah, we're going to put a foot of dirt on top of the levee from the I-5 to 33rd, and we're going to put backup power on some important pump stations and replace some old pumps.
Yeah.
What works for me is I tell people, look, we've had several close calls. You're aware of that, 96, Vanport flood, so forth. We've had a number of close calls. We've got global warming. And now we have the federal government handing us a good chunk of change if we can come up with a match. Do you really want to pass that up? And generally everybody says, no, of course not. Let's do it. Oh, and I throw in also, they're handing us a good chunk of change because we've done a good job managing it so far. So you can trust us to manage it going into the future.
Okay, I'd like to get you guys out of here so you can go home, enjoy the weather, hit the sauna, whatever you need to do. I just want to say thank you for your patience and your diligence, because we played hopscotch through the whole agenda today, but we got it done. And with that, I would just say entertain a motion to adjourn.
So
Thanks,
moved.
everyone.
Okay,
Thanks, Tanny.
thank you. Let's have a good evening. Thanks, everyone. Bye-bye.
Bye.